I'm excited to kick off these virtual Agile meetings. This is my first time doing a virtual presentation, but it's always really exciting for me to get to share World Vision's journey and the way we've gone about embedding agility, mostly within the marketing department, but also now we're seeing that spread across the whole business. And what I want to do is be able to give you guys a little bit of an insight into working into a not-for-profit. So I guess what's our mission, why do we do the work we do, and then show you how powerful it can be when we apply agility practices to that and how much we're really getting out of doing that. As Ian said, please jump in if there are any questions. I certainly want to make sure that you guys can take this in any direction you want to, and if you want to get more information about something, then let's take it there. I'm quite happy to do that. So the first thing I want to do is actually introduce you to some of the vulnerable children that we work with. I've picked two of my favourite stories. Working in a comms department, we're really lucky to get first-hand access to this kind of these stories and the stuff that's happening in the field in our programs. And whilst I've never had the privilege myself of travelling to the field, you know, you see certain stories and they stick with you for a long time. This one is a little girl named Chiru. These are the before and after pictures, but on the left there is a picture of Chiru with her kettle on her head. She's 5 in that photo, and that's 2 years ago. And she lives in a little village called Kasot, which is in Kenya. And every day, Chiru has to walk to get clean water. It's nearly a 7-kilometre round trip, which is a long way for a 5-year-old. It takes her nearly 2 hours to make that trip out to the water source and back every day. But that water source isn't really what we would call a water source. It's a dry riverbed. So when they get there, they have to dig for the water, and they have to hope that there's some water there. And they have to line up with all the other people in their village, the other surrounding villages, and goats, camels, other, you know, everyone that's come down to access that water supply. People are washing in it, they're drinking it. You can imagine the unclean nature of that water and how sick that children and families get from drinking that kind of water. You know, it's full of parasites, disease. Means girls like Chiru are often too sick to go to school. But every day she gets up and she carries that little kettle down to the riverbed. They dig for the water. Now, that kettle is all she can carry, but really it only holds enough water to get her through to morning tea time. It's hot and it's a long walk. So every day Chiru will get up and she will walk to the water. She will then fill her kettle and walk to school if she hasn't had to wait too long and if it's not too hot. She spends the day at school where she doesn't have access to clean water. Then she will return to the riverbed and then fill her kettle again and then walk home. So every day for them is very much shaped by this walk for water, and will they have enough water to get through the day? Her mother worries how the family will have enough water to drink, to water plants, to look after their livestock. The second image you can see there is Chiru last year. She's 7 years old now, and she was thrilled when World Vision were able to put in a pipeline from a nearby mountain, which brought clean water down to their village. And the pipeline obviously doesn't just bring water to her village, it brings it to every community that sits along that pipeline and to their school. And the first day that they turned the tap on, World Vision were lucky enough to be there, and Chiru was like if she got to turn the tap on and the water came out, and her mother Monica yelled to everyone, "Hurry, bring the jerry cans before the water runs out, come and fill them." But of course the water didn't run out, and she's not only able to get access to that clean water at home now, but to school, and they don't have to worry about the water running out. And she's well enough now without those parasites and disease that comes through dirty water to attend school every day, and she wants to be a doctor because she now has access to that education. So lovely Chiru sticks with me every day when I'm at work. This is another one of my favourites. This is actually a region called Humbo. It's in Ethiopia in an area they call the Great Rift Valley. And being a valley, when it rains, it floods. You can see that image on the left there is actually about 20 years ago. And you can see it's an incredibly barren landscape. Families that live in this community rely on farming and agriculture for livelihoods. It's their way of surviving. And you can imagine trying to grow crops in an area that looks like that. So as I said, it's a valley, and without any shrubbery or trees or anything there, when it rains, it pours and it floods into the valley and it washes away everything that's there. So their chance to grow crops to feed themselves is next to none. On the right there, you can see a picture of what the Humbo region looks like now, and that's after 20 years of World Vision doing reforestation there. And that means that now just over 90% of that land is reforested. So now families can not only grow crops to feed their families and have enough to eat throughout the year, but they also grow enough crops to sell at markets. So now they have livelihoods as well. They're able to generate income for their families. The reforestation of the area is also generating carbon credits. So they're actually able to sell those carbon credits, and in return for the carbon credits, they're able to buy things, infrastructure for their communities, like silos to store their grain. So they've improved their circumstances considerably. And the thing that makes it one of my most favourite stories is because you can actually see this transformation from space. If you look at the satellite images from 20 years ago and you look at them now, you can actually see that the landscape of this region of Ethiopia has changed significantly. The reforestation is, it's undeniable. So I love, particularly in our time now where there's a lot of talk about climate change, this one is such an impactful story for me. So these are just some of the stories that we live with and that remind us, why we do what we do. So the question here, I guess, is how can we do more of that? I've mentioned that we're using agility in a marketing department. Is there much familiarity with marketing? Shall I do a quick run through?
That'd be great, because I'm working in a marketing department at the moment. And
you've got no idea what they're doing?
Exactly.
So most people say that marketing is all the pretty pictures, right? We do the drawings and, and maybe the fun words and stuff, but really in any business, marketing's job is to drive new revenue into the business through targeted communications. So that's about knowing who we're giving messages to and where are their eyeballs. And we use campaigns as a way to spike that activity. So in particular periods of time, we'll want to bring certain awareness or attention to work we're doing, to products, ultimately driving the purchase of a product or a service, in a particular period of time. So that new revenue can look like new people supporting World Vision. It can look like existing people choosing to do more or something different with us. But the reality is that we have to deal with a really intangible product, right? It's not something you can go to the store and pick up and look at. You don't get to do something with it when you get home. So we have to work really hard to give people that experience and to connect them to the work they're doing, to connect them to the change and the impact they're actually having in the world. So that's what we're working really hard to do. So I guess, the question I get asked often is, well, why would a marketing department choose to use Agile? It's not particularly common. You're not only a not-for-profit, but now you're a marketing department who wants to use this too. And for me, there's two real reasons to do it. The first is because World Vision is an impact-led business. What we want to do is help people see the impact that they're having in the world, the change that they're actually making. And the use of agility actually gives us a stronger ability to do that, because when we think about focusing on value, for example, we're focusing on things of impact. So we've got a much clearer way to show that impact and to really show people the real change and the lasting change that they're having in the world. But the second reason we do it is because we want to build resilient communities. What we're striving to do when we're out in these developing countries is to help them improve the circumstances they're in, better things for themselves, and then be able to sustain that moving forward. So we want to leave them to be resilient to the things they might face: drought, flooding, food insecurity, and we want to use agility to do the same internally. So within our head office, we want to build resilient teams that are able to adapt to change and be resilient to the circumstances of working in an international aid situation. And I think, you know, World Vision's been around for a long time, and over that time, you know, we've had to learn a lot. You know, in that time, you learn to adapt or die, essentially. You know, we've learned over that time that the face of poverty, it's changed significantly. You know, it used to be about malnutrition and hunger. You know, if you think back to the 80s, you know, the biggest humanitarian crisis of that time was famine. Many of you might be familiar with World Vision's 40-hour famine campaign that was born of that need and one of the biggest, you know, issues of that time. But the reality is that it changes, you know, and we have to learn that and know that the face of poverty will continue to change. It's gone from, you know, us seeing children with distended bellies and flies on their face to urban environments, for example. Think about the slums of India, and children are becoming vulnerable in those urban contexts. We're talking about early childhood marriage. You know, we're talking about so much more than just hungry children around the world now. So we've had to learn to adapt to that. So where did those first seeds get sown for us? I think the reality is when World Vision first started using this thing called Agile, we were just following a fad. That's the actual truth of it. We were following a fad. I think probably 4 years ago now, I was put through an Agile Fundamentals training course with IC Agile because, you know, everyone was talking about an Agile thing. And that was fine. And, you know, it sort of didn't really go anywhere for a while. And then when I had a colleague go through the same fundamentals training about 3 years after that, she said, hang on, I can see how some of these tools can help solve a problem that we've got right now. So now we're talking about, okay, there's some tools there that could help us. You know, we had some real challenges at the time around visibility of work. You know, we had people rocking up and saying, I need you to do this piece of work for us. And we'd be like, oh, we can't do that. We're really busy. And they'd say, what are you working on? What could you possibly be doing? You know, and so our work had become invisible to the rest of the business. We had no priorities at all. No one could actually tell us, you know, if I had 4 chiefs standing around, none of them could tell me what was more important for us to work on. And we didn't really know what was actually feasible. How much could we do at any one time? Which things should be big things? Which things should be small things? And so there's no doubt if you look at some of the basic tools, they can start to resolve some of that for us. But I think that planted a seed for us. But the reality was that seed really grew into a plant and maybe a bush, you know, when I went to last conference last year and really realized that behind these tools was such a powerful notion about how great teams work together, about those really basic principles of, you know, productivity, but what makes high performing teams really great, you know, the trust and the understanding of each other, and also the work they were doing and how they could go about doing it in a different way. That really drove it. So we've really driven forward on the principle of what makes great teams work together and how we get great clarity on business value. So that really started to create, you know, the growth of our seed, if you like, much more than the tools, you know, help solve our problem. But there's no doubt that we've really had to work hard through the implementation. You know, it's not quick or easy or straightforward, you know, and I think if I think about our journey to date, we've really had three main challenges that we've had to kind of pass through to get some growth and progress and really get progressively better at the way we're doing this and really get that value out of it. So this is what they look like. So the first one is actually understanding how it works for us. It was really difficult for us to start with, to even interpret the language and the jargon as to how that works for a marketing team and how it works in a not-for-profit context. You know, a quick Google search will give you a lot of really tech-heavy articles and literature, and that was difficult for us to wade to say, well, what does that even mean in our context? You know, we're trying to work out how do you break a direct marketing campaign into pieces of work that you can put on a wall, and how do you iterate on those? How do I explain to creative teams, to designers and copywriters, what I mean and why we would do it this way. So there was a real imperative for us to create space for trial and error. And there was a lot of trial and a lot of learning out of that.
Sorry, could I just ask you,
Yep.
do you still find that that's the case, that most of the information that you find out there is still tech-focused for Agile, or do you see that changing?
Sorry, that just broke up a bit, Paul. Could you just repeat
sorry.
that?
Do you still find that most of the information that you can find out there on Agile tools and all the rest of it is still tech-focused, or do you see that that's changing?
I think it's changing a bit. I'd say it's still heavily weighted to a tech focus, but I am seeing some great blogs and things pop up that are more focused on Agile marketing. So you can get a bit more information if you go searching. But I think, in honesty, once I got my head around what even those tech focused articles were trying to tell me, the interpretation, it got easier and easier as I went. I don't balk nearly as much when I come across a tech article. I can interpret easier. So time eases that barrier as well. But there's definitely lots of people cropping up now who are starting to say, hey, here's ways that it can apply and why you would use it in a marketing space, which is really encouraging as well. So we had lots of trials. Sometimes that meant, putting 150 cards on a wall for a sprint and seeing if that worked, and just getting that complete overwhelm of, oh, so much work, I don't know what to do. And sometimes we had 5 cards on the wall and we were like, all right, there's nothing moving anywhere. That wasn't the way to do it either. So we went through lots of ups and downs like that. And we learned, lots and lots of things along the way, just in trying to do things differently. We started with a whole department at a wall. That was at the time, maybe 40 people at a stand up in the morning. I can see you all shaking your heads. Crazy, right? But that's how we started.
Yeah.
People had 3-hour planning sessions and now they're down to, 90 minutes. So we had a lot of trial and error. The second thing we had to do though was just get some baseline education happening. I said I did fundamentals training, but I could count on my hand the number of people who had any kind of formal training by any kind of provider. So we actually had to sit people down, sometimes for a whole day, and basically say, here's what you need to know about what we're trying to do. Just kind of create a common baseline to break down some of those barriers, to get everyone on the same page and say, if you know nothing, at least you will all know the same baseline of information. And that really helped us at least have some commonalities about what we were talking about across all the different teams and parts of our department. But the last challenge, I think, in this book about how it works for us was actually to talk about what language we were speaking. I've told you that the tech language was a bit of a barrier for us. And people say to me, what language were you speaking? But things, we had to speak human to each other. So if I wasn't speaking human, what was I speaking? Well, we're all speaking our own languages. We have a lot of different teams in the marketing department. They're all speaking their own individual technical languages. We all speak the language of busy. We're too busy for more meetings, to do extra things, to think about things in a different way. And then we were trying to ask them to speak about this thing called Agile that has, funny words like Kanban and stand up and things like that in it. And that was just a layer that was just too much for them. So when we started to say, hey, here are the problems you guys say you have that this can actually answer for you. Do you want to be sure about what you should do today, tomorrow, for a fortnight? We can do that for you. Do you guys want to work more cohesively as a team? Do you want to be able to share your ideas? We can help you with that. Do you want to go to one meeting every day for 15 minutes instead of 4 different meetings to talk about the same things? And they're all like, yeah, we want to do that. So that helped us get past the, how is this going to work, in a marketing space.
Good question, Jordana.
Yep.
You mentioned, you actually said how, your question to yourself was, how do you iterate on a marketing campaign? Did you actually manage to do that? So you'd start off with a simple campaign and then build up different dimensions to that?
Yeah, so it's still hard for us in some channels rather than others. So digital channels are easy, just like when you build software, because you can test them quicker and learn about them quicker. So we do a lot it's crazy to say we didn't use to optimize, but we didn't. And I come from an advertising background. It's very typical that people would do a campaign, do a yearly campaign, launch it to market and say, you know, oh, let's see if it works. And if it didn't, we'll say, see you next year and let's try again. So there's no doubt we learned really quickly how to optimize our digital spaces well, and now we've learned how to test them better as well. So do something small before we've done the whole shebang.
So
and
you're
then
getting
optimize
feedback
as well.
somehow, are you?
Yeah. So the printed mediums are a little bit more tricky still. We have worked out how to do them better and how to take some of the testing that we can do in a digital space through to sort of get more certainty about what you're about to print, and then use digital channels to essentially optimize what happens in the print space. You know, so if it needs to be compensated for, then we can do that in a different way. So it's still difficult. You can't print something and then reprint it, but we have found, you know, ways to reduce the risk sometimes, or be more certain that what we're doing is more likely to be the right path, or to do less things if we're not really sure that it adds extra value to it.
So would you use something like consumer testing? You get someone in the room and say, which do you prefer? What makes sense to you?
Yep, we use a few different things. We have a supporter panel that are always available for us to test anything we want to. So they're a digital panel. Sometimes we'll call actual focus groups together and we'll test. So like at the very start of a campaign, we'll always test with different focus groups what resonates with them and how we best say that to people. And then sometimes we'll also live test essentially in our digital spaces, like float a post on social media that basically says what we'd like the campaign to say, and see how people respond to it. And if they don't like it, then we look at, well, why might they have responded that way, and then test something else, because those learnings actually they still translate really well into your printed communication.
I was going to say a very similar thing. I've recently come from a digital background myself at Telstra, and when I was part of the digital team, we used to do a lot of user experience testing. For example, we were about to launch a new web page where we were going to kind of invite customers to contact us, and we would call in a panel, very similar, live customers to actually get their feedback and test to see what actually resonates with them. And we found that really successful.
Yep. It does. It works really well, and sometimes you reaffirmed in what you think is the strongest idea, but actually sometimes they go for something really sort of simple, and you go, wow, I mean, look at this fancy shiny thing, and they're like, no, just give it to me simple. And we're definitely hitting more nails on the head, if you like, by doing that and by making it more of a practice to work out how we might get that information before we just take a potluck shot at it.
That's really good, thank you. I've just got a couple of questions, if that's okay.
Go for it.
You're doing sprints, are you?
Yes.
Yep. What kind of, have you settled on a short or long sprint, or what sort of works for you?
So most of our teams do a fortnightly sprint. Fortnight is, I think it's just about the right time. A month would be too long. So fortnight fits quite well with most of our teams, except for one, and that's our social media team. And they're quite unique, and they really need to work on a news cycle essentially, because in social media you've got to be topical and relevant at all points in time. So they really need to know from each other what's happening in the news today, and how can we use that. What does World Vision have to say about what we can see happening in the news and media space? So whilst I was a bit reluctant, I thought, gee, that's super short, it actually works really well for them, and they do plan once a week. They don't have retros and things once a week, but they plan once a week. But the biggest transformation for them is actually having the planning sorry, but also the daily stand-up changed. They were just sort of having these ad hoc conversations every day about, oh, have you seen this over here? Oh, have you heard what so-and-so said on The Age or whatever? And now once a day, you've got social media, you've got PR, and you've got brand coming together to share those ideas. It actually sets them up really well for the day. So, so they're the only team that works on that really fast cycle, but it's one that makes good sense for them.
them, yeah. And do you find with a marketing perspective that you have a kind of a sprint pattern, I guess, that you might do something in one sprint, then the next sprint you're doing something else, and that's a repeating pattern? So that's one thing that I've really struggled with our marketing department, is that it takes several sprints for us to get something out, and
Yeah.
they like certainty.
Yeah, they do. It varies. All of our squads are a little bit different. One of them, which is the closest to a tech space, they're our automation team. So they're building and deploying EDMs, and they find that they're almost spot on every sprint. One sprint they're heavy in development, the next sprint they're heavy in build, and it does tend to swap back and forth. So we tend to develop a lot of EDMs and then build a lot, and that goes back and forth. The campaigning teams are a little bit less, their rhythms are a little bit less obvious in that sense, but they do still tend to have cycles of working and then this upweight of release, if you like, activity suddenly getting finished.
Yep.
But what we've actually worked to do is actually say there's actually no reason why it should be that way. They're working too much to let's not do it until the deadline, instead of let's just keep pushing things through, like sitting in approvals, for example, which just tells you that you don't have everyone gathered around that same piece of activity. You don't have everyone in that team looking to just finish it and get it approved and out the door. So a lot of them are getting smoother now, getting some consistency around how much work they finish every sprint, instead of those big peaks and troughs. But it took us a long time to get there, a really long time.
Yeah, okay. Oh, that's good. Thank you so much.
It's okay. So I've taken you through that first challenge for us, and that was actually just saying, how do we get from a tech-based, how do we take a tech-based methodology, if you like, and try to apply it to our teams? And that gave us some good traction. We had some momentum, we had less meetings, we had some answers to some of those problems for the teams, and we were starting to do things for the right reasons, not just because we told them to show up at rituals. But the reality is, sometimes once we've got the plan going and we think we've got things in place, a change comes along. We all experience that, right? We have a change in the sprint. Someone's forgotten some requirements, or there's been a change in circumstance. But the reality is that for us, sometimes a change to our sprint looks like this. So this is September 28th, 2018, 5 o'clock on a Friday evening, and a 7.4 magnitude earthquake hits the central Sulawesi province in Indonesia, and it was followed by a 3-meter tsunami. Now, in this situation, we've left work on a Friday night, and by Saturday morning, the sprint plan you just made is completely redundant. We're facing a situation now, we've got over 2,000 people dead, more than 68,000 families whose homes are damaged or destroyed. They're without access to clean water or food or shelter. And that is literally what a change to a sprint can look like for us. That's not every sprint, that's the good news. But this is what happens. Teams have left, and Saturday morning, some of them are called in to deal with this situation instead. And we now have to refocus a whole team, sometimes a whole department, on an emergency response. And that probably sounds like it's a pretty easy decision, right? These people are in crisis and they need that immediate and urgent help. And you're right, we do that straight away. But the reality is, it's not such an easy decision, because the question we're asking ourselves is, well, what about the work we were doing before? These people are impacted by a force of nature, by something completely outside of their control, and we are going to throw all our resources at to help them and give them those basic human needs that they need to survive. But the work we were doing before that was also helping a community to survive. So now we're faced with this difficult decision that is about prioritizing one community's lives over another, about one community's needs for survival versus another. So that's a pretty difficult question to grapple with, which really highlights that our ability to adapt is critical. And not only do we need to adapt, but we have to do it quickly, because when that sprint plan is suddenly redundant, we have to know how we're going to form a new plan of attack and how are we going to deal with this change, and then quickly form a new plan for the work that we were doing before. So that's really where our second challenge comes in. How are we going to change direction rapidly? And the reality is we've got great visibility now, and we're kind of doing agile things, but there's still a lot of work. There is a lot of work happening all the time. And we had a really unpredictable and irregular throughput is the best way I can put it. And that makes for some pretty nervous stakeholders, which is kind of what you're alluding to, Paul. People get nervous when they're not sure what's coming and when it's coming. And this is a huge challenge for us, but actually was solved by some really easy principles. What we did was actually just change the way we thought about the work. We didn't change what we were doing. We changed the conversation we had and the way we thought about the work we were doing. The first one was just better batching. How did we break the work up? I worked with a great Agile coach. I was really, really fortunate recipient of some pro bono Agile coaching. So the coach was coaching the coach. And he gave us this great analogy to work with, which is about looking at the work like cars on a freeway. So that's looking at, if you're going to jump on the Monash in the morning, if we all rock up to the on-ramp and you drive on, there's no road signals, and we drive straight on, what happens? You end up with a traffic jam, right? And the same is true of our work. If we release all of the work and we start doing everything at once, we're just going to cause a traffic jam. Nothing can get through. So what we started to do was first look at the pacing of our work. So how many cars were we letting on the freeway at the same time? And then we quickly discovered that we also had to look at the size of the car, because sometimes you don't want to send the Tarago down the freeway, you've got to send the Hyundai Getz. So we had to look at both of those pieces of the puzzle to get the work flowing through better. The second thing we wanted to do was look at flow of the work, flow efficiency, not just bums on seats, not just how many people we had sitting at desks for how many hours of a day. We had to start, looking at people as people and how they were working together to get that work through, instead of just saying how much work can I fit into the number of hours we've got available in a work day. The third one should be really obvious to everyone, but somehow never is, and that's just to stop multitasking, to give our teams the clarity and sometimes the permission to say, I just want you to focus on this one thing. All of you, all 6 of you, just focus on doing this one thing and getting it out. That's most important right now. And to stop this fallacy of trying to do lots of different things at once. And the last thing is just focus on done. Don't focus on how much we can start. So that's utilizing our pull systems instead of our push. Focus on how we finish the work, not on how much we can start. There is a real tendency, I don't know if it's all marketing departments, but definitely a tendency in ours to say, hurry, time's running out, we'd better start that thing. And I said, you can do that thing quickly. Finish the other stuff first, then start that. You'll do it faster. So we just had to change that conversation. And go on, Julia.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say this really resonates to me. I recently joined, I moved roles and recently joined our complaints operations team at Telstra. And we recently introduced Agile. So we're really on a really infancy Agile journey of introducing all the methodologies. And in particular, one particular team that I work with, this really sounds like them. They're so used to taking on work constantly and saying yes to everything. And they're kind of getting into a pattern of, we'll go into sprint planning, but then things will drop in ad hoc during a sprint. And of course, the things that they were working on gets dropped because other priorities take over. And, they find themselves on a continuous cycle of not actually completing anything.
Yeah, we would definitely had all of those same situations. And for a little while, the rest of the business felt like we were difficult to work with because what they heard was, I can't bring my work in. I have to wait a fortnight to bring the work in, and they won't let me do anything, change anything in between. And I said, no, there's lots of ways in. Come see us at Stand Up. Come and have a chat to your product owner. We can find a way, but come and show me that what you've got is more important than the things we're working on. And of course, what ultimately happens is they say, oh, it's not. I can't do that. No, I can't say this is more important. So, you know, there's that conversation about urgent versus important that that comes up all the time. So we've changed our conversation.
Question quickly. You talked about you're looking for flow efficiency. Are there any techniques you use there you can tell us about?
We literally used to plan bums on seats. We used to have planning sessions that people would have a sheet and they would estimate how much time they thought that task would take to do. And once they'd filled their hours, as in I've sit at my desk 40 hours a week, and once I've got 40 hours of work, I'll stop. We literally stopped doing that and started looking at what was most important for us to work on that sprint and how we could do that together. We didn't have like a really specific tool. We just stopped having conversations that treated people like resources, if you like, and started looking at how they, you know, get that work through together. So the focus on done and that flow piece sort of went hand in hand in terms of like, let's not start things, let's prioritize the stuff that's 98% there and make sure it gets done. We just asked people to have different conversations.
Did you have Kanban training? Because it sounds like a lot of this comes from Kanban.
No, we didn't specifically have much training on anything.
Okay. Is there a framework that you're using, or have you kind of
put
together?
We're mostly Scrum, but we've adapted things that we've learnt along the way to help us, you know, just change the way we look at the work. So I suppose we're not being particularly purist about applying one particular methodology, but about borrowing a little bit from each to help us improve the way that the work is happening and the way the teams are working together.
Brilliant. I think it's the best way anyway.
Yeah. I'm sure it's going to make some purists cringe, but you know, it's working for us so far. So we've got great conversations happening, but the reality is, at first, nothing happened. But we continued to have those conversations because we did think that we were still having a better and more productive conversation than we were in the past. And then we started to see progress. I told you already that our throughput was unpredictable, and that could have meant anything between, say, 17 and 40 pieces of complete work. The numbers are irrelevant, you know, that's the departmental output, but 17 to 40 is a big range. And we had about 5 sprints of new conversations, and then suddenly they did 76 pieces of work. Now, 76 again is not necessarily a sustainable piece, but it was the first sign of evidence that told me that the change in conversation had meant that all the pieces of work that were 98% done were finished. They were prioritized because they were already sitting there, and we were like, oh, that's nearly done, just get it done, just get that thing done. And that's the first moment where I was like, this is working, this is starting to have an effect on our teams, and we can see stuff moving. It was, you know, evidence of complete work. So we just needed that last little push to get it through. What that means in terms of the impact to our sprints that I just showed you before is that we could actually start to go from having changes, any kind of change, big or small, impact our sprint. We could make the change, we could do the new piece of work, and then we could go back to the old one quickly. In the past, if an emergency had hit, I can actually remember occasions in my history at World Vision where some sort of emergency had hit. We dealt with the crisis and we had to cancel a piece of marketing activity because we couldn't return in time or with enough resource to deliver that piece of work. Now, that actually means that we're not generating that new revenue for the business, and that means that we don't have more donors join us and we can't continue to commit to the field programming that we're doing in the field. More donors equals more work. One less marketing campaign means less work in the field. So it's critical for us to be able to do those campaigns. It's not just a nice to have. So we've now gone from having to cancel campaigns because we were dealing with a natural disaster to dealing with an emergency, sometimes within about 5 weeks. We can actually deal with the disaster, we can set emergency response off on the right foot, and we can return to the existing program of marketing work. We can still deliver it, you know, with minimal harm, if you like, to that existing program. Yeah, it means we're talking about how can we do this a bit smaller. We can still do it. We still got back there to do it because our pace and our flow has picked up. The last challenge for us was actually to focus on, is it valuable? Now, I know this is critical for every business, but it's really critical in a not-for-profit because we are always obviously looking to do more with less. It's a consistent mandate, and but just like any other business, we want to be sure that what we focus our attention on is the most important thing that World Vision could do. Not every charity dollar is an equal dollar. We could spend a lot of time and effort doing everyone's great ideas to, to get people interested, but they're not going to equal, they're not going to be equal in terms of the revenue you're going to bring in for the business. So we have always had a problem with being able to literally compare apples with apples. That is, how do you compare one marketing campaign with another? Because some of our activity is acquisition focused, that is bringing new donors to World Vision, and some of it is growth and retention activity, and that's working with our existing supporters. And it's really easy for an acquisition team to say, here's how much money we're going to bring into the business, and really hard for a retention team to use the same metric to give it some degree of value, something for us to understand what it's worth. So we realized that we had to find a way to look beyond revenue, to stop using money-making activities as the only thing we would prioritize and the only way to work out what a piece of work's value was. So instead of asking, how much money is this going to make? I'm being a bit crude, but that's, how much money do you think this is going to bring in? We started asking, what happens if we don't do this? Because then we're partly talking about risk reduction, but then we're starting to uncover value in terms of brand reputation. Will it damage us? Do we have some kind of legal compliance? And that happens, we've got to get this out. We are required to do so and to notify people of this change or something that's happening. Are we going to lose current supporters because of this? I'll give you an example. Every year, throughout a whole year, we have a team that focuses solely on impact reporting, and that is making sure that anyone who donates money would have a very a deep understanding of what that money went towards, what it achieved in any financial cycle. But if you take that into a context where we're working with corporate partners and philanthropists, they're donating sums of money to particular programs of work, and they of course want to know either did we do what we said we were going to do with the money, did it achieve the thing they wanted to do with that community, or just what change happened as a result of me working with you. But in that financial cycle, so in an annual cycle, I guess, the donors want to see that, but they want to see what happened with the money they spent before you're going to ask them for more money. So when someone comes to a board and says, I need to deliver the reporting for X donor, if I say what happens if we don't do it, we can't have the next ask. They don't want to hear from us again until they can be sure that, something really impactful happened with that money. Or we'll lose them, and that's a donor lost to the business. So that's when we're starting to uncover value. Another example, when we've spent sometimes up to 15 years with a child sponsorship community, that community has had amazing growth and progress and are now sustainable. So it's time for us to leave them to sustain the programs of work we've left them with. But it's important that we communicate that to the people who've been sponsoring children, sometimes for over 10 years themselves. They're connected to those children. We're both legally required, but also want to be sensitive to the fact that people have developed relationships with these children. So if I say, what happens if we don't do that piece of work? What happens if I don't notify supporters that your community is doing really well and we can now, move on to help other children in need? That's a whole lot of supporters potentially that we lose. A whole lot of supporters who are really upset because they've got this connection and you've suddenly taken it away for them. So we actually start to uncover real value by having those conversations. But we also managed to get our stakeholders so involved in those conversations that they felt like we were really doing collaborative decision making. It really lent into that notion of distributed power, if you like. no one ever left those conversations with a lack of clarity as to why the pieces of work landed where they did. There was no arguing at the end of a conversation as to why the first priority was the first priority, and theirs might have fallen at second or third or 10th, but they knew why and they were comfortable with that decision. So it absolutely improved our relationships as well, because now we don't have stakeholders who are nervous about when we're going to do things. They know when, and they had a say in why it would fall that way. So that really, I guess, rounded out our experience. It meant that now we were getting work through better, and we had all of our stakeholders on board and aligned with the way we were going to deliver the work and what the priority was and where that value really lies. If we were to ask the CEO what's most important to World Vision, we felt like we had confidently made that decision together. And I mean, this is, you know, nearly 2 years in the making to get through all of those challenges and to really start seeing the progress. But when we did, let me show you what it looks like. Okay, so World Vision had a problem for a number of years. You know, our flagship product, and it's definitely our most scalable opportunity to reach vulnerable children around the world, was in steep decline. And it's actually been in decline for 6 years. So this is an ongoing trend. So we're 6 years in, which really tells you that, you know, you need something really special and fresh to really win back, I guess, the hearts and minds of the Australian public. You know, they've sort of fallen out of love with child sponsorship, but it's a really big challenge to put to a business to say, how are you going to arrest the decline of a 50-year-old product? You know, we're an internationally renowned charity, but now we're definitely in decline for the thing we are most known for. This campaign, which we call the 1,000 Girls campaign, was born out of that recognition that girls in developing countries suffer immensely simply due to the fact that they are girls. There was no other reason than that. And the harsh realities of their daily lives can actually be directly impacted by our product, by child sponsorship. So we know that we've got a tangible solution to a big problem. We know that we can do something to help girls who suffer those realities simply because they were born into that gender. And the timing of this campaign aligned really nicely with the rise of the Me Too movement. So this is a really topical thing. In 2018, everyone's starting to talk about Me Too. This issue of women's empowerment is really coming to the forefront. And we had a really clear business objective driving this. It's clear, right? Sponsor 1,000 girls by October 11, which was International Day of the Girl. Now, this campaign not only reached its target, but it smashed it. We had 1,565 girls sponsored last year, and we had 565 boys, because boys are important too. And the result of that campaign meant that last financial year, our child sponsorship product grew by 7%. So for the first time in 6 years, it grew by 7%. Now, there's many contributing factors to that, but there's really no doubt to me that it actually had the magic ingredients that really prove that agility, when it's, you know, behind good insight, it provides great working rhythms, and it gave the team all the right pieces of the puzzle to create an amazing campaign like this. We had amazing supporter insights. This was clearly an issue people cared about. Women's empowerment is really important. It's still really important. And people resonated with the fact that they could do something about women's empowerment and helping girls. And we gave them a really clear way to help them solve that. It's clear what we wanted people to do: help us sponsor 1,000 girls. But the team had complete priority from the business. They were actually pulled out of their other teams, and they were given nothing else to do except this piece of work. So they had space and priority, and those things generated speed. In my entire time at World Vision, I've never seen a marketing campaign go out in less than 12 weeks. This one was delivered in 5. And they actually used none of the tools. They didn't have any boards. They didn't have any formal daily stand-ups. They didn't have any planning sessions or any retros, but they moved at pace together with clarity and purpose, backed by great supporter insights. And that's the kind of campaign it generated. It was actually so successful that the Global Partnership picked it up this year. And this year we had 10 offices around the world commit to sponsoring 1,000 girls, getting 1,000 girls sponsored with their supporters. So that's 10,000 girls by this October 11. In actual fact, this year's campaign sponsored 1,900 girls and I think 365 boys. So again, really another incredible result for the Australian market. And they did that with some more formality around it this time, but again, with a very, short, fast-paced burst of activity. So this is kind of like, the moment where the light shines out of the clouds and you go, oh, it's working. So we know we've got traction now, and we just kept working to keep our teams working with this rhythm and producing that amazing work. And that's why I said earlier, we're hitting more nails on the head because of work like this and because of the evidence that tells us that this is actually steering us in the right direction. So I guess when I think about my journey and what I want to say to people, particularly when they're starting out with non-tech teams, and about how you can kind of go about utilizing these tools and this way of thinking for yourselves, my 3 key messages, I think, are really just to make it your own. Find the way for you to connect to the core values of agility. I often joke now that when I started having to teach, newcomers to our department, I used to teach them, here's all the tools that we do. And now I don't. I actually start with the heart of Agile. I start with the 4 pillars because they're 4 things that any team can do with any kind of tool you want. And if you're doing them, then you're being agile. So I think it was really important for us to connect to those core values because they really spoke to everyone. They cut through the jargon, and everyone wants to collaborate, deliver more, improve what they're doing, and use their reflections to power those improvements and what they're delivering. So if I had my time again, hands down, I'd be starting there. So that was a really important factor for us. The second one is definitely to kind of be prepared to go on that journey, because it's not a silver bullet where you flick the light switch. That was a mixture of analogies, sorry, that was bad. You can't flick the light switch and just make everything change or better or different. So you've really got to be prepared to start here. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Start here and now. One of our chiefs supported us in the early days when we were really lost in the woods and trying to work out how we're going to trial this thing and work differently. And she said, just start where you are. Don't wait for the perfect time where you have enough resources, enough teams to make it whatever you think the end goal is. Start here and work out where you're going each step of the way, which is what we've continued to do. The last one is focusing on your purpose. Now, arguably, we use it to achieve the world's highest purpose, to eradicate poverty. But as I said at the start, our purpose is actually about building resilient community. Like, spoiler alert, we can't solve poverty. It will continue to change and look different. There will always be vulnerable children in the world, but using agility is helping our ability to be resilient to those changes, to see them coming and to continue to adapt. It helps us do it in the field with those people who are vulnerable and seeing where they are. And now it's helping us do it inside the walls of our business as well. We like to say that it helps us to see orange, that is, see world vision and what's important to it, instead of acting like, fruit salad, all different pieces in a fruit bowl, pulling in different directions, So we now have continuous conversations about what is the most valuable thing for world vision, not what's great for marketing or what's great for finance or what's great for field programming. So that's really our purpose, resilient and adaptable communities. That brings me to the end, guys. Oh, I do have a nice thank you. There we go. Nothing like ending on cute kids.
That's absolutely fantastic. And Jordana, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing that with us. It's been immensely valuable, but also just really touching to see what you're working on and the value you're contributing there. It's really wonderful. I just had a quick question about what have you found has been the most effective path for training people? So you mentioned when people come on, you'll induct them in the four pillars and that sort of thing. And this is one area that I've really struggled with. I sort of started not taking people from a 5 to 10 on their agile path, but starting from 0. And I've gone very gently about it, sort of tried to teach or coach people or immerse them in it just as they've gone along. But I've been there 4 months now, and I'm sort of wondering whether that's the right approach to go. Do you find that you give people like a solid overview and spend a solid piece of time with them initially, or do you just let them sort of pick it up as they go along?
No, I spend a solid hour at least, sometimes a bit more, with every new person that starts. Sometimes, usually in groups, we have 3 or 4 that might start at a time, and I give them, I say a thorough rundown. I always sit with them to say, here's some key things you need to know. I want them to understand not necessarily what we do, but why we're doing it. So that's why I start them with those core principles, so they understand what the teams are striving for. And then I do the basics, like I'll show them the wall so they get to see how it comes to life. But I don't labor that part, because they're going to be in with their teams and they're going to pick that stuff up along the way. So I deliberately spend time with everyone so that they do get an understanding of why we're doing this. And because we don't now bombard them with the technical jargon and things that they're sometimes very, very unfamiliar with, they're like, oh, that's great that you guys are working to collaborate together. Oh yes, I can see lots how stopping to reflect on your work would help you improve. So it generates a lot of good conversation just around how that's helping teams be really awesome together and how it's producing great work. And then they go into the teams and they get to see in detail how they make that happen. We did start at the very beginning with giving formal, scheduled training to everyone, and we had to find that happy medium between, compliance, like forcing people to do it, to say, I'm sorry, but you have to know this stuff, and giving it to them in a way that they could understand. I can spend that time with the new people now, because we've passed that first major hurdle. We've done 90% of the department, and we just do the extra ones that come as we've got turnover. And we have quite a bit of turnover, but we're able to do that just on an as-need basis. Whereas at the start, we had to give everyone some basics around, you just all need to know this information now so that we can all move forward together. But since that point, I've found incidental training really helpful. They don't know they're getting the training, but, we drop things in, like sometimes we use retros to point them at a specific topic, and they sort of get a bit of training through that sort of scenario. And I've actually found that the teams really respond well to that, because they don't feel like they're being trained, but they're definitely getting the information and they get what's relevant to them at the time that they're open to hearing it.
So would you select the values, agile values, or something, and focus on how we're going with these, what we do better? That sort of a way, like pick a topic that way, or?
Sometimes, but like I said, they're a team that really struggles with jargon, and they don't want to just talk about, the 12 principles of Agile. They have struggled to relate to that. So we might not just go, hey, here's the 12 principles, how are we going against those? But we might pick 1 or 2, or I'll wait for someone to call it out in a retro and say, hey, this is happening. I'm like, oh, so you said that this principle that we said we should work to isn't going so well. Do you want to talk about that a bit more? And then use that to coach them into, what does it really mean? How can we change our behaviors? So I try not to formally say, I want us all to look at these today, but I do things like, bring their own team principles back in and say, how's that going for you? Sometimes, like I had a retro a few weeks ago and someone said, this sprint wasn't great for me. I didn't feel very productive. You know, I sort of tried to make a start on things, but stuff's not ready. And I said, what did you use your extra time for? I didn't know. I just grabbed extra work to do it. And I said, did you use it for learning and development? Did you do something for the team that would make our work easier next time? So this is where I started talking about, have any of you seen Dan Praga's work around competitive advantage time? Ian, you probably heard him talk about this, about the cats and the meows. So I started talking to them about the fact that your downtime is not lazy time, and it's also not time where you have to feel like you should pull another piece of work in. If the team's not ready, use your time to do something that's going to progress your competitive advantage, which then equals a team's competitive advantage, which in turn equals World Vision's competitive advantage, right? So that was sort of like on the spot training for them on a topic that was relevant at the time.
That's good.
I'd just like to say thank you, Jordana. Really good presentation. I'm really interested in the value, finding the value of work and prioritizing using value. At the moment, I'm working with a team where we're using cost of delay to work out the value, because we've got multiple different areas of the bank needing our services, and so we need to work out how much we need to be able to compare ideas from all different areas, and so we have to basically fundamentally get everything down into a dollar value or a pound value. What's it going to, is it protecting revenue, increasing revenue, reducing costs, avoiding future costs? So I use the what if we don't do it question as well. There's another one I use, which I'm not sure, you can tell me if it applies to your area or not, but if someone wants to build something, build a system, the question is, what if we had to do a manual workaround? So maybe we'd have to hire 30 admin people and do it in spreadsheets, and it would be a whole load of work. What would the cost of that be, and what would the mistake rate would be, all that sort of thing. Is that something that you thought of using, or have you got any other questions that you use to dig out that value?
We don't have a long list of questions, though the sorts of ones you've highlighted are the things that tend to come out. We do talk a bit about, you know, what the risk would be. So I guess when we say what happens if we don't do it, sometimes we're looking at loss of revenue. We're potentially looking at decline of existing supporter base, which is a loss of revenue, but there's loss of new revenues in, you know, new income we wanted to build on, and there's we rely on getting this annually, and if that is depleted, what happens? So, but I find that even just saying what happens if we don't do it draws that information out. What it's actually done is kind of pushed people to actually put some more diligence into their business cases. We're notoriously bad at making any kind of business case for anything, because, you know, sometimes that there's a difference between, you know, charity mindset and commercial mindset, and people's charity mindsets leads them to believe that any idea is a good idea, and we're just going to throw them all in the mix and find a way to make it happen in some shape or form. And so now that people know that they'll get asked what happens if we don't do it, that's enough to prompt them to say, I'd better go away and get some information. We have tons of information available to us. The problem is really that they just weren't using it. We can actually easily quantify what would happen. And so now people will show up. They know I'm going to ask that question. Before I even ask them what it's worth, I'll say, what happens if we don't do it? And they'll say, well, here's the impact. And to be honest, sometimes the answer is nothing, or not very much, or oh, it'll be late. It'll be later than last year. And we're like, okay, let's just put that aside, shall we? So we haven't had to delve much deeper yet. There's always conversations.
Have you heard of 5 whys for digging out root causes?
Yeah.
5 whys is actually useful in this situation as well. We can, why is this a good idea? What will that mean? Why? So, as long as you preface it with, I'm not being rude, I'm just trying to dig down to the root cause.
You should listen to my podcast that got released today.
Is it about whys?
5 whys.
5 whys.
Anyone else got any questions or comments for?
Jordana, I've just got a quick one. I'll catch up with you. This was really good. I'm very excited for you, and you should be very proud of yourself. You haven't talked about budgets.
Yes.
The conflict that I see is there's always the budget cycle versus your delivery cycle.
Mm-hmm.
You haven't yet once talked about how you overcame, or you haven't had to overcome, the conflict of your governance requiring budget determination of the value that you're delivering. So consumption of resources versus the number of deliverables that you're putting out. Has that been a challenge, or what sort of conversation and language changes have to happen there?
That's a tricky one, because we've absolutely got targets. We have business metrics, you know, and like I said, at a business level, if I take it outside of the marketing department, at a business level, to deliver all of the work that we've committed to in a financial year, we have to generate a certain amount of revenue. We've actually had situations where in previous years we didn't meet our field resourcing requirements. That is, in the business year, we did not generate enough revenue to continue to commit to the programs. We couldn't continue to do what we said we would, which actually results in us having to pull out of programs that are in progress. So a community that was had World Vision support, that we were doing work with that community on their needs, and we might be halfway through that, you know, 15-year or so term, and have to say, I'm sorry, we just can't continue to resource this program, and we have to leave. We leave before they're self-sustaining, which is a terrible situation, and one we never want to be in. So we're always really mindful of those targets, and I also just said we're notoriously bad at writing business cases, which means you will rarely find an actual budget sitting behind it. In all honesty, people will often not do that cost equation between, if I've got to bring X amount in, what's it going to cost to do it? We're making a pretty big assumption about our employees just being able to deliver everything we need. They can just do that, right? So what we've actually done, the way we plug the gap, is to have these continuous conversations about value, and also I guess it's the conversations around optimization, because the more we make sure that we do something small and see if it works, do it bigger if it works really well, stop doing it if it doesn't, and the more that we watch the dials, the closer we get to hitting the targets. We had a couple of years where across the business, obviously marketing's not the only way revenue comes into the business, but across the business, you know, there was, you know, a huge amount of downturn. We really struggled to meet those field commitments, and there is an incredible shift now to getting closer and more often reaching and exceeding the targets, because we just make better calls. We decide to do a little test. We know 1,000 Girls was actually there because we couldn't meet our target. We weren't going to sponsor enough children that year to meet the child sponsorship commitments. And they said, it's getting close to the end of the financial year. What are we going to do to plug the gap? And they said, you're a team. Let's work out how we can solve this problem. And it took them a couple of days to work out that there was something topical and something relevant that we had that answered that issue, and you know, the rest evolves from there. So we're having those conversations now about what we have to reach and how we continuously get there. What happens when you fall short? In the past, we just fell short. We had no backup plan. There was no way. So behind that, we constantly have to ask if we can only put resources to one thing, because if there's not going to be, this is a project, it has a budget, and you're going to have to keep it within these parameters, we have to keep assessing we have to assess the whole ecosystem as to where you invest those resources. So whilst now we've got squads that are working to deliver certain programs, they've got some certainty now over, well, we can do what we can do with these 8 people, so they can make some calls over that. And then we have to make really strategic calls about, if you were going to add anything to that, where do you add it? let's not add it all at once, for example, because you don't want to get to the end of the year and discover there's a gap that you now can't support. So that's sort of the way we're getting around that conversation at the moment.
Okay. Very good. Thank you for sharing.
No worries. Any other questions?
Maybe just with your, sorry, I don't mean to hog the mic and ask you all the questions, but with your teams, have you found that any team members have been a bit precious or afraid to let go of their work sharing with others? So, for example, if you had a marketing specialist, reluctant to let anybody else jump in and help?
Yes. I've seen copywriters who are afraid to let anyone else touch the words, write the words, because, you know, that would be stepping on their toes. I've seen marketing advisors or campaign managers, you might call them, who were, some of the more senior ones, afraid to let go a little bit and let their team work out how they were going to deliver that piece of work. So a bit of micromanaging.
Yep.
And I've seen nervousness from other teams who were scared that we would take something they asked us to do into a secret bat cave of agility and turn it into something that they, you know, didn't want or wouldn't like. And none of those things have happened, but there's no doubt people felt vulnerable, even just doing simple things like asking for help. You know, you're asking people to do what they think is admitting failure by saying, I can't do all those things today. And it's taken a long time, and sometimes still, you know, crops up where people don't feel like they can have that conversation and don't really realize what leaning on each other means and how strong that makes the team. I had a whole team go into, you know, crisis because they went in there, they were stressed and they went in their individual holes instead of, you know, leaning on each other. The good news is they came out the other side a much stronger team for it and for the learnings, but they were a real classic case of we're all feeling really anxious about the amount of work we have to do, and only I could possibly do that thing, and so I won't ask of my teammates to help, and I won't tell them that I'm feeling, you know, stressed or anxious about this piece of work. So yeah, it does happen all the time, and it takes a while for people to understand that there is strength in that conversation. Yeah.
And do you find that that's driven by a fear of individual failure, like that they feel like it will, so for example, if a marketing specialist enabled somebody else to help them and it didn't go well, that they would then be held to account rather than it being a team thing? Yeah, definitely. I don't want to start banging on about KPIs, but there's no doubt that they don't help, you know, and historically our marketing team and our creative team were actually two separate departments, and there was not a healthy relationship between the two, and marketing held all the targets, so they were accountable to make sure that we had a certain number of children sponsored or generate a certain amount of revenue for that particular marketing campaign, and the creative guys didn't. They weren't accountable for anything. They're accountable for quality of creative outputs, but in a marketer's mind, there's no skin in the game there. You don't care, and therefore I get the say. So you've got, you know, creative teams are nervous that they're going to be steamrolled by the person who does hold to account, but equally the marketers feel like I'm the only one that's got skin in the game. You know, if you're gonna, it's a horrible phrase to use, but if you're gonna ask anyone who's the ringable neck, if this doesn't go right, you know, who gets, you know, brought in to talk about what went wrong here? Yep. They don't feel like there's skin in the game. And so we had a lot of tension around, you know, I'm responsible for this, but, you know, but we're supposed to be a team, but, you know, so people would feel like they're any respect that you need, you know, to work well in team, respect of each other's individual skills and that contribution it makes to the team was just going to be disregarded. People felt like, doesn't matter what I say or how good my idea is, it'll get overruled by the person who holds the budget or the target or something like that. And it took us a while for people to move past that. We haven't moved our KPIs past that, so that still causes a little bit of tension.
because ultimately, if you have to ask someone to be held to account, there is ultimately that person, but they've gone a long way in moving past acting that way together.
What
They
have
put
you
it
found?
aside and they look for those, you know, shared outcomes.
Yeah. What have you found has been most helpful in getting people to move past that?
A lot of team building.
Okay.
A lot of what we try to get everyone to focus on is the objective. So if I go back to 1,000 Girls again, everyone was really purposeful but passionate about getting 1,000 Girls sponsored and about the impact we can have on women's empowerment as a, you know, one of the biggest issues of modern day times. And so we have a lot of conversations, particularly when a project's going to start, of what is the mission here. And that is not what's the brief or what are you asking me to do, not what are we doing, but why are we doing it and what value does it bring to the business?
Yep.
What value does it bring to our supporters? And we've had a lot of tense conversations. You know, I've had some really heated arguments with teams where they actually couldn't, they were completely divided between whether our supporter experience or timeliness was the most important thing in the project. You know, we were talking about sliders and what thing was the most important on the list, and the creative team were like, are you telling me that if the supporter experience is bad, you're still just going to do it just to get it out on time? You're just doing it anyway. And the marketers are like, yep. And this is where the KPIs come in, right? Because they have the target. It's their job to get it done, to put something out into the market. And and that was like it was like a bridge too hard at that point. You know, they couldn't get past that divisiveness. But continuing to have a conversation about what are we all striving towards here? What are we all trying to achieve? And sometimes it even has to come down to what are we achieving today? What will we achieve next week? What are we going to achieve for the sprint? What's this project going to achieve? Has helped them get past having individual conversations. And now if you ask them how they want their team to run, they'll regularly say, we want to be a team that's all like we've got each other's back and we're all working for the same thing, not, you know, working on our own individual patches.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Shall we ask one more question and then wrap it up? Anyone got a question who hasn't asked before, perhaps? All right, from anyone then. Okay, sounds like we're wrapping up. So Jordana, thank you very much. That was really awesome. Enjoyed that. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining me.
All right.
Thanks so much,
See you
Jordana.
guys.
See you
Great.
soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.